Either you hand over the keys to that bedroom right now, or you pack your bags and get out of my house tonight. The sharp, echoing crack of a crystal wine glass slamming against the mahogany dining table shattered the quiet tension of our Sunday dinner. I did not flinch. I slowly lowered my fork and looked across the lavish spread of roasted lamb and truffled asparagus. My stepmother, Valerie, was glaring at me. Her designer gown looked impeccable, but her face was twisted with absolute disgust. To her, I was an eyesore in her perfectly curated, wealthy Atlanta suburban life. I was 33 years old, wearing a simple beige sweater, sitting quietly while the rest of them paraded their designer labels. "That room belonged to my mother," I said, keeping my voice completely even. "It is the only thing in this entire estate that still has her memory attached to it. You have 6 other empty guest rooms in this house. Why do you need mine?" Before Valerie could open her mouth to yell again, a delicate, condescending sigh came from the end of the table. Harper, my younger half-brother's white fiancé, elegantly wiped her mouth with a linen napkin. "Come on, Jada," Harper said, her tone dripping with that familiar, sickeningly sweet pity she always used when addressing me. "Let us be realistic here. You are 33 years old. You are single. You work that cute little low-level financial consulting job from home. What do you need a master suite with a private balcony for? You barely even have a social life. MJ and I are going to be married soon. We are building a family. We need a space that reflects our status when my parents come down from Connecticut to visit." Harper looked at me with a tilted head, offering a condescending smile. "I mean no offense, Jada, but my family is used to a certain standard of living. My father is a state senator. When my family stays over, they cannot be cramped in a standard guest room. We need your suite to properly host them. You really should be happy to step aside for the greater good of the family. You can take the smaller room near the laundry area. It fits your minimalist vibe much better anyway." My half-brother MJ chuckled as he poured himself another glass of expensive bourbon. At 28, he had never worked a hard day in his life, surviving entirely on our father's fading bank accounts. "Harper's right," MJ said, leaning back in his chair with an arrogant smirk. "I am stepping up in the world, Jada. Dad is about to make me the vice president of the company. We are going to be hosting investors, politicians, and the country club elite. We need the space to entertain. You just sit in your room typing on your computer all day anyway. You do not need a luxury suite to be a basic freelance consultant." I looked at MJ. His arrogance was almost laughable. He did not know that his upcoming promotion was to a company drowning in debt. But I kept my face blank. "I pay rent to stay in that room," I reminded them calmly, turning my attention to my father. "I have paid my share every single month since I moved back in. I do not ask for anything. I stay out of your way, Dad. Are you really going to sit there and let them take the last piece of my mother from me?" My father, Marcus Sr., finally looked up from his plate. He wiped his mouth, his expression entirely devoid of warmth. For years, he had enabled Valerie's extravagant spending and MJ's lazy entitlement. "Do not bring your mother into this," my father said coldly. "Your stepmother has made a completely reasonable request. MJ is building a legacy. He is marrying into a prominent political family. Harper is bringing high society connections into our circle. They are elevating this family's name. What are you doing, Jada? You sit around playing with spreadsheets, contributing nothing to our social standing." I stared at the man who was supposed to protect me. "I contribute financially, Dad. I pay my way. MJ has not paid a single bill in his life. Money from a dead-end consulting job does not buy influence," my father shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "I am sick of your mediocre attitude. I am sick of you bringing down the image of this family. We are trying to build an empire here. We are moving in circles with senators and CEOs. You are a stain on our reputation. When Harper's parents come to visit, I will not have them looking at a 33-year-old failure occupying the best suite in my house. Valerie smiled triumphantly, crossing her arms over her chest. You heard your father. The decision is final. You are an embarrassment, Jada. You always have been. You lack ambition, you lack style, and you lack the basic respect to support your own brother's future. We are done accommodating your pathetic lifestyle. Harper chimed in again, her voice sickly sweet. It is really for your own good, Jada. Maybe a smaller space will motivate you to get a real career. Or find a husband. You know someone in your own tax bracket. My father pointed a stern finger directly at my face. I will not repeat myself, Jada. Failures do not get to dictate family rules under my roof. Either you clear your things out of the master suite and hand the keys over to Harper and MJ right now, or you pack your bags and get out of my house tonight. Make your choice. The silence in the dining room was absolute. They sat there, expecting me to break down, cry, and submit to their demands. Instead of giving them the satisfaction of a tear or a desperate plea, I simply reached for my linen napkin and wiped the corners of my mouth. I placed the cloth neatly beside my half-eaten lamb. Pushing my heavy mahogany chair back, the wood scraping against the marble floor echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. I looked at my father first, then at Valerie, and finally at MJ and Harper. Their smug, expectant faces were frozen. They truly believed they had backed me into a corner. They genuinely thought I had nowhere else to go. Understood, I said. The word was crisp, sharp, and entirely devoid of the devastation they craved. I will pack things. I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room without looking back. My steady footsteps on the grand staircase were the only sounds filling the tense void I left behind. I walked into the master suite, the room that still held the faint, comforting memory of my biological mother. Valerie had spent years trying to erase her, replacing her antique vanity with modern, soulless decor. I pulled my favorite leather suitcase from the closet. I did not bother packing the cheap dresses Valerie had forced upon me for country club dinners, nor the costume jewelry my father had gifted me as an afterthought on previous birthdays. I packed only what truly belonged to me. My laptop, my secure hard drives, my mother's vintage pearl necklace, and a few tailored suits I actually liked. The packing process took exactly 10 minutes. I zipped the suitcase shut with a sharp, decisive pull. I dragged the suitcase back down the grand staircase. The family was still gathered near the foyer. They had abandoned their dinner, clearly waiting to watch my humiliating exit. Valerie stood with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, a triumphant sneer plastered across her heavily made-up face. Harper leaned against MJ, whispering something in his ear that made him chuckle. My father stood near the double front doors, looking completely detached, as if he were simply dismissing an underperforming employee. Do not think you are taking the car, Valerie snapped, her voice cutting through the foyer. That sedan was purchased with family money. You do not get to drive off in a vehicle we paid for while you figure out how to survive on a minimum wage salary. Leave the keys. I stopped walking. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the heavy key ring, and casually tossed it onto the polished marble floor. The metal clattered loudly, sliding right to Valerie's expensive heels. Keep it, I said, my tone utterly indifferent. But you might want to call the insurance company by tomorrow morning. The premium is 3 weeks past due, and the registration expires on Tuesday. Good luck explaining that to the local police if MJ decides to take it for a joyride. Valerie's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, her jaw tightening. Just get out, Jada. I am sure you can manage to order a cheap ride share from the gate. Do not expect the security guard to let you back inside if you forget anything. I will not be forgetting anything, I replied. I turned the heavy brass handle of the front door and stepped out into the crisp, cold Atlanta night. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind me, severing my ties to that toxic household once and for all. I walked down the long brick-paved driveway, the wheels of my suitcase rolling smoothly behind me. The crisp autumn air felt incredibly refreshing. From the second-story window, I could hear the faint sound of Harper, laughing, likely making another cruel joke about my impending homelessness. I did not reach for my phone. I did not open an app to hail a ride. I simply walked to the end of the driveway and waited by the towering iron gates. Less than 2 minutes later, a pair of brilliant LED headlights pierced the darkness of the suburban street. A pristine, midnight black Maybach S-Class glided silently up to the curb, its elongated chassis gleaming under the streetlights. The vehicle came to a smooth, perfect stop, exactly where I stood. The driver's side door opened immediately. Thomas, my private driver, stepped out wearing his immaculate dark suit and peaked cap. He hurried around the front of the luxury vehicle, his posture radiating absolute respect. "Good evening, Madam CEO," Thomas said, his voice projecting clearly in the quiet night. He bowed slightly before reaching out to take my suitcase. "I apologize if you had to wait. The transaction paperwork took an extra 5 minutes to finalize." "You are right on time, Thomas," I replied, handing him the luggage. "Is everything confirmed?" "Yes, ma'am. The wire transfer cleared successfully. The Buckhead estate is now entirely in your name. The staff is already there preparing the master wing for your arrival." Thomas opened the heavy armored rear door for me. As I stepped into the plush, ambient-lit interior of the Maybach, I glanced back at the house. The front door had swung wide open. Valerie Marcus Sr., MJ, and Harper were all standing on the porch, frozen in absolute shock. Their jaws were practically on the floor. They stared at the $500,000 vehicle and at the driver who had just addressed their failure of a daughter as a chief executive officer. I did not wave. I did not smile. I simply maintained eye contact with Valerie as Thomas firmly closed the door, sealing me inside my private sanctuary. "Take me home, Thomas," I said, sinking into the heated, massaging leather seat. The Maybach pulled away smoothly, leaving my former family standing on the porch in stunned, humiliated silence. We drove away from the suffocating suburbs and headed straight into the heart of Atlanta's most elite neighborhood. We bypassed the standard mansions and climbed higher into the wealthy hills of Buckhead. The heavy iron gates of the estate parted silently as the Maybach approached. The tires crunched softly against the pristine gravel of the circular driveway. The property was a modern architectural masterpiece of glass, steel, and dark stone surrounded by towering pines that completely shielded it from the main road. I stepped out of the vehicle and took a deep breath of the crisp night air. There were no nosy neighbors here. There was no stepmother judging my clothes. There was only the quiet hum of success. A woman in a tailored navy suit stood waiting by the massive double front doors. This was Elena, my estate manager. She offered a warm, respectful smile as I approached the entrance. "Welcome to your new home, Madam CEO," Elena said, stepping aside to let me pass. "The transition team has finished setting up your primary office on the second floor. Security protocols are fully active. Would you like a tour of the remaining wings, or prefer to settle in first?" "Thank you, Elena," I replied, taking in the soaring 30-foot ceilings and the sweeping floating staircase. "I will skip the tour for tonight. I need to get straight to work. Please have a pot of black coffee brought up to the office." "Right away, ma'am." I walked up the glass-paneled staircase and headed straight down the eastern corridor. The master wing was larger than my father's entire suburban house, but I bypassed the bedroom and walked directly into the executive home office. The space was dominated by a massive, custom-built walnut desk and a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline. I set my worn leather suitcase down on the rich Persian rug. It was the only item in the room that looked out of place, a final remnant of the life I had just left behind. I sat down in the ergonomic leather chair and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner embedded in the desk surface. The hidden desktop console hummed to life. 3 large monitors rose smoothly from a concealed slot at the back of the desk. I typed in my encrypted passcodes, watching as the glowing logo of Vanguard Equity illuminated the dark room. I was not a struggling financial consultant. I had never been a struggling financial consultant. For the past 10 years, while my father bragged about his failing mid-level company and Valerie paraded around country clubs, I had been quietly building a private equity empire. I started Vanguard with the small life insurance payout from my biological mother, leveraging it into aggressive, high-yield commercial real estate acquisitions across the East Coast. Now, Vanguard managed over $4 billion in assets. I opened my encrypted communication channel and dialed my chief financial officer. It was nearly midnight, but I knew David would be awake. He answered on the first ring. "Good evening, Jada," David said, his crisp British accent cutting clearly through the speakers. "I saw the wire transfer confirmation. Congratulations on the Buckhead property acquisition. Did the move go smoothly?" "It went exactly as predicted," I replied, pulling up the current asset allocation dashboards on my left monitor. "My father threw me out. Valerie demanded the keys to my car. They think I am wandering the streets looking for a cheap motel." David chuckled softly, the sound dry and professional. "Their ignorance is truly astounding. If Marcus Sr. knew he just kicked out the primary shareholder of the firm that is currently buying up his corporate debt, he might have an actual heart attack. Speaking of which, I have the latest reports on his company's financial standing." "Go ahead," I said, leaning forward and pulling up his data file. "Marcus Sr. has over-leveraged his primary firm again," David explained, his tone turning completely serious. "He missed the last 2 quarterly payments on his primary commercial loans. The regional bank was preparing to classify the debt as toxic. Vanguard Equity officially purchased that debt portfolio at a discount 3 days ago. You are now legally his largest creditor." I looked at the glowing red numbers on the screen. My father was drowning in millions of dollars of debt, yet he had just promised MJ a promotion to vice president of a sinking ship. He had allowed Valerie to humiliate me over a guest bedroom, oblivious to the fact that his own financial foundation was crumbling into dust. "What about MJ?" I asked, pulling up my half-brother's file. "He and Harper are planning a massive engagement party. Valerie has been bragging about booking the most exclusive country club in the state." "That is the interesting part," David noted, typing rapidly on his end. "MJ does not have the liquid capital to fund a high society wedding. He has maxed out 3 different premium credit cards in the last 48 hours. His debt-to-income ratio is catastrophic. Harper's family might have political influence, but they clearly are not looking at her fiancé's bank statements." "Let them spend," I said coldly. "Allow them to continue living their wealthy fantasy for a few more days. I want to see exactly how far they are willing to stretch their non-existent finances before the bottom falls out." "Understood," David said. "There is one more thing, Jada. While I was running the compliance checks on your family's accounts, my forensic accounting team flagged a major anomaly. It concerns the sealed trust fund your biological mother established for you." I frowned, my fingers freezing over the keyboard. "My trust fund is legally sealed until my 35th birthday. I have not touched it, and the bank is explicitly forbidden from authorizing any disbursements. What kind of anomaly?" "That is what raised the red flags," David replied, his voice dropping lower. "Someone accessed that sealed fund, Jada. They made a massive illegal wire transfer. I am sending the encrypted dossier to your secure server right now. Look at the authorized signatures page first." I dragged the cursor across the screen and opened the authorized signatures page. The scan loaded instantly. My breath hitched. There, at the bottom of a loan origination document from a major national bank, was my name. The signature was an incredibly close imitation of my handwriting. It captured the sharp loop of my first initial perfectly, but it was absolutely not mine. I leaned closer to the monitor, carefully scanning the notary stamp. The document had been executed exactly 4 months ago. "David, this is a forgery," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I have not signed a single document related to that trust since the lawyers established it. The stipulations were absolute. The fund was to remain sealed until my 35th birthday. How did the bank authorize this?" "They authorized a loan," David corrected, his keyboard clicking. "A massive high-interest line of credit secured against the principal balance of your trust. Because the trust contains diversified blue-chip stocks, the bank treated it as premium collateral. The perpetrators used a fraudulent power of attorney to pledge your assets." "Who are the primary beneficiaries?" I asked, a cold fury rising. "The funds were dispersed through shell companies, but my team traced the terminal accounts easily," David explained. "The arrogance is actually staggering. They barely hid the money trail. 60% of the loan was funneled directly into Marcus Sr.'s corporate accounts to delay his bankruptcy proceedings. The remaining 40% was routed into a joint checking account shared by Valerie and MJ. I pulled up the itemized ledger. The transaction history read like a shopping list for people desperate to buy high society status. Multiple charges for bespoke tailoring, first-class flights, and luxury hotel suites filled the pages. Then, a single highly glaring transaction caught my eye. A wire transfer for $250,000 to a luxury jeweler in New York. "Harper's engagement ring," I said aloud, the pieces falling into place perfectly. "That massive diamond she was flashing tonight. She bragged MJ designed it himself. He bought it with money stolen from a dead woman's trust fund." "It appears so," David agreed. "MJ also used the stolen funds to put a down payment on a new Porsche and secure the deposit for the country club engagement party. They are spending millions they do not have, leveraging an asset they do not own." I sat back, staring out at the city. Valerie had stood in that foyer demanding my car keys. My father had called me a failure. Harper had mocked my career, looking down at me from the pedestal of her family's wealth. Yet every luxury they enjoyed, the roof over their business, the ring on Harper's finger, the extravagant party they were planning, was funded by my money. They had crossed from toxic family dynamics into federal crimes. "This is not just theft," I said, rapidly shifting into strategic execution. "By transferring these funds across state lines to the New York jeweler and using digital banking networks to secure the loan, they have committed federal wire fraud. This is an entirely different level of legal exposure." "Precisely," David replied. "Identity theft, bank fraud, and wire fraud. The penalties for these offenses carry mandatory minimum prison sentences. How do you wish to proceed? I have our corporate legal team standing by. We can freeze the funds and file an injunction by morning." "No," I said immediately. "Do not freeze the loan account yet. If we freeze the funds now, they will panic and hide their remaining assets. We are going to let them keep spending. I want them to feel completely secure in their stolen wealth. I want them to max out every credit line and sign contracts they can never fulfill." "You want to give them more rope," David concluded. "Exactly. MJ and Valerie are obsessed with their public image. They want to show off for Harper's parents. We will let them host their elite country club event. We will let them invite the politicians and socialites. I want all of Atlanta's high society present when the house of cards collapses." "I will compile the vendor list by dawn," David said. "We will track every dollar spent from the fraudulent loan." "What about your father's corporate debt? Vanguard Equity holds the leverage, but the grace period expires next week." "Draft the default notices," I instructed, eyes fixed on the glowing screens. "Prepare the foreclosure paperwork for the family mansion and the corporate headquarters. Hold everything in escrow. We are going to synchronize the financial collapse. I want the bank fraud, the corporate bankruptcy, and the residential foreclosure to hit them simultaneously. It will be a total asset liquidation, David noted. They will be completely ruined. They ruined themselves the moment they forged my signature, I said quietly, anger crystallizing into pure resolve. My mother built that trust to ensure I had a future. They tried to steal my future to fund an illusion. I am going to dismantle their illusion permanently. I opened a new secure channel to my private investigator. The financial data was irrefutable, but I needed boots on the ground. I needed to know exactly who Harper's politically connected parents were and how much they knew about MJ's actual financial situation. If Harper was going to use classist insults against me, I would ensure her pristine family name was dragged directly into the center of this federal fraud scandal. David, get some sleep, I said. Tomorrow, we start tightening the net. Good night, Jada. The legal teams will be ready when you give the word. The line clicked dead. I sat alone in my new office. The anger that burned inside me during dinner was gone, replaced by sharp clarity. They demanded I pack my bags. They demanded I leave. They thought they had won. I reached for my coffee cup, taking a slow sip. They had no idea that their nightmare was just beginning. 3 days passed. I sat at a shaded corner table on the grand veranda of the Piedmont Legacy Country Club, dressed in a sharp ivory suit. My 2 senior acquisition partners sat across from me, reviewing compliance documents. For over a century, Piedmont Legacy had stood as Atlanta's most elite, historically white social institution. It was precisely the kind of establishment Valerie had spent her adult life trying to infiltrate. I took a slow sip of water, my eyes tracking a familiar group being escorted by the hostess. Valerie walked with her head held unnaturally high, draped in a flashy designer dress that screamed of borrowed money. MJ strutted proudly beside her. Harper walked ahead of them, linking arms with her parents. Her father, a prominent state senator, looked bored. Her mother surveyed the patio with a judgmental gaze. Valerie and MJ were trying to prove they belonged in the same wealthy stratosphere as Harper's political family. They were seated just 20 yards away. I watched silently as Valerie aggressively flagged down a waiter, ordering the most expensive champagne on the menu with a loud, theatrical flair. It took exactly 12 minutes for Harper to spot me. I saw the momentary flicker of confusion on a face, rapidly replaced by a vicious smirk. She whispered to MJ and Valerie. All 3 of them turned their heads to stare at my table. Harper excused herself from her parents. She marched directly across the veranda toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the stone tiles. Valerie and MJ followed closely behind her, eager to witness what they assumed would be my ultimate public humiliation. They moved like a pack of wolves. Harper stopped at the edge of my table, crossing her arms. "Well, this is certainly a surprise," Harper announced, her tone dripping with mock pity. "I did not realize Piedmont Legacy had started hiring from the suburbs. Tell me, Jada, are you interviewing for a waitressing position, or did they bring you in to scrub the golf carts? Sneaking into an exclusive country club through the service entrance is desperate even for you." Valerie stepped up next to her future daughter-in-law, scoffing loudly. "I told the security guards at our neighborhood gate not to let you back in, Jada. You do not belong here. The initiation fee alone is more than you will make in a lifetime of crunching your little spreadsheets." MJ chuckled, leaning against the stone railing. "Come on, Mom. Do not be harsh. Maybe Jada is trying to find a rich husband to bail her out of homelessness. Too bad the men here prefer women with actual class." My 2 senior partners stopped reviewing their tablets. They looked at the 3 intruders with expressions of absolute bewildered shock. They knew exactly who I was, and could not fathom why these people were speaking to a billionaire private equity chief like a wayward servant. I raised a single hand, silencing my partners before they could intervene. Are you enjoying your lunch with the Senator Harper? I asked, my voice calm and perfectly modulated. I see your parents ordered the imported caviar. It is quite expensive. Harper rolled her eyes, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. Of course we did. My family does not look at prices, Jada. We actually belong in establishments like this. Now, before my father notices you bothering us, I suggest you quietly pack up your little bags and find the nearest exit. If I have to call the general manager, it is going to be incredibly embarrassing for you. That is a wonderful idea, I replied, maintaining a relaxed, unwavering smile. Let us call him right now. I raised my right hand and gave a subtle two-finger gesture. Less than 5 seconds later, the general manager of Piedmont Legacy hurried across the veranda. He was a distinguished man in a dark suit, known for running the club with an iron fist. Harper smiled triumphantly, stepping quickly forward to address him. "Excuse me, sir," Harper said, gesturing toward me with a manicured hand. "This woman is harassing my family. She is not a member here. I need you to have security escort her off the premises immediately." The general manager did not even look at Harper. He bypassed her completely, coming to a sudden halt right beside my chair. He bowed his head deeply, his posture radiating total subservience. "Madam CEO," the general manager said respectfully, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet veranda. "Is there an issue with these guests? Shall I have them removed?" Harper froze. Her triumphant smile vanished instantly. Valerie's jaw dropped open completely. MJ stopped leaning against the railing, his eyes widening in total disbelief. "No, Gregory, that will not be necessary," I said, folding my hands neatly on the table. "They are celebrating a very special engagement today. In fact, I want you to take the entire bill for their table, the champagne, the caviar, the entrees, and put it directly on my personal account." The face of Harper turned a violent shade of red. "What is going on? Why is he calling you a CEO? You cannot afford our lunch." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my ivory suit. I looked Harper directly in the eyes, my expression shifting to cold, absolute authority. "I am not just paying for your lunch, Harper," I said, my voice sharp and penetrating. "I am paying for the staff, I am paying for the champagne and the caviar. I can do that because at 9 o'clock this morning, Vanguard Equity officially closed a hostile takeover of this entire estate. I do not just belong at this club. I own it. Every blade of grass, every golf cart, and every single chair you are currently standing next to." Stepping closer, I watched the color completely drain from the heavily contoured face of Valerie. I stared at them, holding their panicked gazes, ensuring the crushing weight of reality settled into their bones. "So, enjoy your meal, Valerie. Enjoy your expensive champagne, MJ. Because starting tomorrow, you are going to need every single free meal you can get." The profound silence that followed my sudden declaration was absolute music to my listening ears. The three of them stood completely paralyzed, stripped of their arrogant facades and choking on cold reality. I slowly turned back to my business partners, permanently dismissing the intruders. I knew exactly what would inevitably happen the very next second. Valerie desperately attempted to hand the waiter her precious black card to pay for her humiliated exit. Valerie spun around, her high heels wobbling as panic overtook her manufactured poise. She refused to accept the reality I had just laid out before her. In her mind, she was still the queen of Atlanta high society, and I was still the invisible stepdaughter she could crush. She marched back toward her table, her face flushed with a desperate mix of fury and embarrassment. Harper followed behind her, looking frantic, desperately trying to maintain composure in front of her observing parents. MJ lingered for a fraction of a second, his arrogant smirk gone, before he hurried after them. I remained seated, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. My senior partners watched the unfolding scene with quiet fascination. We all knew exactly how this script was going to play out. When Valerie reached her table, Harper's father raised an eyebrow. He clearly sensed the heavy tension radiating from his future in-laws. Harper's mother looked deeply unimpressed, crossing her arms over her expensive silk blouse. "Is there a problem, Valerie?" the senator asked, his tone clipped and impatient. "Who was that woman?" "She is nobody," Valerie snapped, her voice trembling slightly. She motioned aggressively for the nearest waiter. "Just a disgruntled former employee making ridiculous claims. We will not let her ruin this beautiful afternoon. Waiter, bring the check immediately. We are leaving, and I am paying for everything right now." The waiter approached promptly, carrying the leather billfold. The total for the imported caviar, the premium champagne, and the 5-course lunch was exorbitant. Valerie confidently opened her designer clutch and produced her heavy metal black card. She slapped it onto the silver tray with a theatrical flourish, making sure Harper's parents saw the prestigious logo. "Take care of this," Valerie ordered. "And please inform the general manager that I expect a formal apology for letting riffraff onto the terrace." The waiter nodded politely and inserted the heavy metal card into his handheld payment terminal. The machine processed for a few seconds. A sharp, negative beep pierced the quiet atmosphere of the veranda. The waiter frowned, pulling the card out and wiping the chip before inserting it again. The machine issued the exact same angry red beep. "I apologize, ma'am," the waiter said softly, leaning in to keep the matter private. "Your card has been declined." "That is absolutely impossible!" Valerie hissed her eyes, darting nervously toward Harper's mother. "Run it again. It is a premium account with no preset spending limit. You must be doing it wrong." "I have run it twice, ma'am," the waiter replied, maintaining his professional composure. "The system says the account has been frozen by the issuer. Do you have another form of payment?" Harper's mother let out a small, highly audible scoff. Harper turned pale, her eyes wide with mounting horror. MJ quickly reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his own platinum credit card. "Here, just use mine," MJ said, his voice cracking slightly. "My mother's bank is probably just doing a routine fraud check because of the large purchase amount." The waiter took MJ's card and inserted it into the terminal. Another negative beep echoed across the table. The waiter shook his head. "Declined, sir. The message indicates this account has also been suspended." Panic fully set in. Valerie began tearing through her designer clutch, pulling out every single credit card she owned. She handed the waiter a gold card, a corporate card, and a standard bank debit card. The waiter swiped them one by one in rapid succession. Beep, declined. Beep, declined. Beep, declined. "What is going on?" Harper demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "MJ, you told me your family had unlimited resources. Why are all of your cards declining at a public restaurant?" "It is a banking error," Valerie shouted, her voice completely losing its refined edge. "Our accounts are perfectly fine." Just then, Marcus Sr. strode onto the veranda. He had stepped away to take a business call, completely missing my earlier confrontation. He walked up to the table looking incredibly stressed, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "What is all the shouting about?" my father asked, looking at the waiter holding a stack of rejected credit cards. "Marcus, give him your primary card," Valerie demanded, grabbing her husband's arm. "There is some ridiculous glitch with the banking network. None of our cards are working, and Harper's parents are waiting." My father did not reach for his wallet. Instead, he stared at his phone, his face draining of all color. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world burn to the ground. "It is not a glitch, Valerie," my father whispered, his voice trembling with sheer terror. "My chief financial officer just called me. Every single corporate and personal line of credit we have has been frozen." "Frozen?" MJ repeated, stepping back in shock. "By who? How?" "By our new primary creditor," my father said, looking up from his screen. The sheer panic in his eyes was magnificent to witness. Vanguard Equity, the firm that bought our debt portfolio last week. They just issued a notice of total default. They froze everything. We do not have access to a single dollar. Valerie gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She slowly turned her head and looked across the veranda, locking eyes with me. I raised my glass of sparkling water in a silent, mocking toast. The realization hit my father a second later. He followed Valerie's gaze and saw me sitting there, flanked by my executive partners, surrounded by the country club staff who were treating me like royalty. "You," my father choked out, pointing a shaking finger in my direction. "You did this!" "Marcus, she owns the club," Valerie blurted out, her voice cracking into a hysterical sob. "She just told us she owns Vanguard Equity. Jada bought our debt." The united front of the so-called perfect family shattered. My father turned his fury onto Valerie. "Are you completely out of your mind, Valerie?" my father roared, his voice echoing off the stone pillars of the veranda. "You provoked the very firm that holds our financial survival in its hands. You insulted the owner of the debt." Valerie recoiled, her hands shaking as she clutched her useless designer bag. "How was I supposed to know, Marcus? She was just supposed to be a failure. She was supposed to be nothing." "Well, she is something now," my father spat, turning away from her in absolute disgust. Harper's father, the state senator, cleared his throat loudly. He adjusted his silk tie, his face an impenetrable mask of political calculation. "I believe we have seen enough for one afternoon. Harper, your mother and I are leaving. We expect a full explanation regarding this alleged banking glitch by tomorrow morning. If this family is facing a scandal, we will not be dragged down with you." Harper scrambled forward, desperately grabbing her father's arm. "Dad, wait! It's just a misunderstanding. MJ explained it to me. It's a clerical error caused by a hostile corporate takeover. The bank froze the accounts temporarily for security reasons. Everything is perfectly fine. The engagement party is still happening this Saturday. We have over 300 guests coming. You cannot leave like this." Her mother gave a stiff, unyielding nod. "We will see you at the engagement party, Harper. Ensure this mess is resolved by then." As her parents walked away, the remaining facade of my former family crumbled into panic. I watched from my table as my father stormed off toward the parking lot, without waiting for his wife. Valerie chased after him, shouting about appearances and social standing, while MJ and Harper stood completely alone on the terrace. They looked like two spoiled children who had just dropped their ice cream in the dirt. But instead of accepting reality, I knew exactly what they would do next. They would double down on the delusion to protect their fragile egos. Back in the secure executive office of my Buckhead estate, I monitored their every move through Vanguard Equity's financial dashboards. I had specifically instructed Gregory, the general manager of the country club, not to cancel their upcoming engagement party. I ordered him to approve every extravagant request they made, provided they signed the legally binding vendor contracts. I wanted them to dig the hole as deep as humanly possible before I buried them in it. My chief financial officer, David, connected to my secure video channel later that evening. The glowing screens illuminated the dark room, reflecting the catastrophic financial choices playing out in real time. "They are pushing forward with the lavish party," David reported, adjusting his glasses. "It is fascinating to watch. Despite having zero access to their primary credit lines, MJ and Harper are currently finalizing a massive upgrade to the floral arrangements and the catering menu. They just added imported truffles and a custom ice sculpture to the invoice. The country club event coordinators demanded a secondary form of payment to secure these upgrades, given the earlier declined transactions." "And how exactly are they planning to pay for imported truffles with frozen bank accounts?" I asked, leaning back in my ergonomic leather chair. "That brings us to the most recent development," David said, bringing a new digital document onto my center monitor. Since Marcus Sr.'s corporate accounts are entirely inaccessible, MJ has taken matters into his own hands. He is currently attempting to secure a rapid, high-interest bridge loan from a predatory shadow lender, the kind of lender that does not ask questions, but requires immediate, hard collateral. I scanned the digital application MJ had submitted. What is he offering as collateral? He does not own any property. His car is financed, and he bought Harper's diamond ring with the stolen funds from my trust. He is offering the family's primary suburban mansion, David explained softly. He uploaded a digital warranty deed, pledging the estate as collateral to secure a $300,000 cash advance. He intends to use the cash to pay the country club vendors and maintain the illusion of wealth for Harper's political parents. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto the property address listed on the loan application. The family mansion is already in total default. Vanguard Equity holds the primary mortgage, and we issued the notice of default yesterday. The property is currently in active pre-foreclosure status. He cannot legally leverage a property that is actively being seized by another creditor. Furthermore, his name is not on the primary deed. It belongs to Marcus Sr. Exactly, David said, a hint of dark amusement in his crisp British accent. MJ just submitted a fraudulent transfer of deed alongside the loan application. He forged his father's signature to grant himself temporary equity rights and then lied to the shadow lender about the foreclosure status. He is committing a secondary act of severe financial fraud just to pay for an engagement party. He is trying to save face at the expense of his own freedom, I murmured, watching the digital signature process complete on the screen. The shadow lender, eager to claim a valuable suburban estate, approved the bridge loan. The funds were immediately authorized for transfer to the event planners. This is a spectacular level of financial suicide, David noted. First, he committed federal wire fraud by draining your sealed trust fund. Now he is committing mortgage fraud and wire fraud again to leverage a house he does not own, which is already defaulted to our private equity firm. The digital footprint is completely irrefutable. Let the bridge loan clear, I commanded, my voice cold and absolute. Let the funds transfer to the caterers and the florists. I want Harper to have her perfect, extravagant engagement party. I want the champagne flowing and the caviar served. They are building their entire high society future on a foundation of federal crimes. When the music stops, I want every single member of Atlanta's elite to witness the exact moment the authorities arrive to collect their dues. I closed the loan application window and brought up the guest list for the upcoming event. It was a who is who of wealthy socialites, politicians, and business leaders. Harper and Valerie had invited everyone who mattered, desperate to prove their social dominance. They were throwing the party of the decade, unaware that I was pulling the strings behind the curtain. Prepare the legal documentation, David, I said, shutting down the monitor for the night. Tomorrow, we build the guillotine. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling glass of the Vanguard Equity boardroom, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished mahogany table. I stood at the head of the room, looking down at the scattered dossiers, digital tablets, and printed bank records. The pieces of my family's impending destruction were laid out like a military battle plan. David had worked through the night, and by 8 o'clock he had assembled the most ruthless legal and investigative minds in Atlanta. Seated to my right was Jonathan Sterling, a former federal prosecutor who now handled high-stakes corporate litigation for my firm. To my left sat Derek Cole, a private investigator whose specialty was uncovering the hidden financial sins of the Southern elite. I took a sip of my black coffee and nodded to Derek. Walk me through the digital footprint, I instructed. Derek activated the laser pointer, highlighting a massive flowchart projected onto the smartboard. Your stepmother and your half-brother are incredibly arrogant, Jada, which makes them incredibly sloppy. We traced the IP address used to access your sealed trust fund. The forged power of attorney was uploaded from a specific residential network. It was not a public coffee shop or a proxy server. It was the private Wi-Fi network at your father's house. They executed the forgery from their own living room. I stated, the sheer audacity of it still staggering. Exactly, Derek confirmed, swiping to the next slide. But the real nail in the coffin is the money movement. Once the bank approved the fraudulent loan against your assets, the funds were deposited into a newly created joint account under MJ and Valerie's names. From there, we tracked a direct wire transfer of $250,000 to a luxury diamond merchant in Manhattan. This was the transaction for Harper's engagement ring. I looked at Jonathan, shifting the focus to the legal implications. Give me the exact statutes. Jonathan leaned forward, adjusting his tie. His eyes gleamed with the precise, calculating energy of a lawyer who knew he held a winning hand. By forging your signature on the loan documents, they committed aggravated identity theft and bank fraud. But the transfer to the New York jeweler is the critical component. Because they moved illicitly gained funds across state lines, using digital banking networks, they triggered a direct violation of Title 18 United States Code Section 1343. That is federal wire fraud. Each count carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. And what about my father? I asked, looking at the corporate debt records detailing Marcus Sr.'s failing business. How deeply is he tied to this specific theft? He is the primary beneficiary of the remaining stolen funds, Jonathan replied, tapping a stack of printed ledgers. 60% of the illegal loan was funneled directly into his company's operational accounts to artificially inflate his liquidity and hold off bankruptcy. While we cannot definitively prove he forged the signature alongside his wife and son, he received stolen federal funds. At best, he is facing gross financial negligence and total asset seizure. At worst, he is an accessory to the conspiracy. Harper is parading around Buckhead with a federal crime on her finger, I mused, feeling a dark, satisfying sense of justice forming. She looks down on everyone, completely oblivious to the fact that her pristine, high society political family is about to be tethered to a massive federal indictment. Her father relies on his clean reputation in the state Senate. This scandal will obliterate them. The evidence is absolutely irrefutable, Derek added, closing his tablet. We have the time-stamped IP logs, the forged notary stamps, the routing numbers, and the itemized receipts for every extravagant purchase Valerie and MJ made this week. They are literally funding their fake billionaire lifestyle with a stolen identity. I walked over to the windows, looking out over the sprawling city. For 33 years, I had played the role of the quiet, obedient daughter. I had swallowed their insults. I had allowed Valerie to treat me like a disease, and I had watched my father consistently choose his new, flashy family over the daughter his first wife gave him. They thought my silence was weakness. They mistook my boundaries for cowardice. They had pushed me out of my childhood home, expecting me to vanish into the shadows and quietly accept my defeat. Jonathan? I said, turning back to the table with absolute, unwavering resolve. I want you to compile everything. The IP logs, the fake power of attorney, the bank statements, and the wire transfers. Bind it into a single, undeniable federal dossier. Consider it done, Jonathan said, already organizing the paperwork. Do you want me to file a civil injunction first? We can freeze their access to the stolen funds today. No civil suits, I replied coldly. Civil suits give them room to negotiate. Civil suits give my father time to call in political favors or beg for a settlement. I am not interested in negotiating with thieves. I want you to take this entire dossier and hand-deliver it directly to the White-Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Jonathan stopped moving. He looked at me, a slow, deeply impressed smile spreading across his face. If I hand this to the FBI, Jada, it is completely out of our hands. They will investigate, they will build a grand jury indictment, and they will execute federal arrest warrants. There is no turning back from that. I do not want to turn back ever, I stated, placing my hands on the mahogany table. They dug their graves deciding to steal my mother's legacy to buy fake prestige. Let the federal agents build their case. Let them secure arrest warrants. We will time the foreclosure of their business and mansion to happen simultaneously. I want the legal guillotine to drop exactly when they think they reach the peak of their society triumph. 2 days after the meeting in my boardroom, the suffocating humidity of Atlanta gave way to a crisp, clear afternoon. I decided to handle a personal errand. Vanguard Equity was hosting its annual philanthropic gala that weekend, and I required a new evening gown. I directed Thomas to drive me to one of the most exclusive luxury boutiques in the Buckhead shopping district. The boutique, simply named Elise, operated strictly by appointment and catered to the city's old money elite. As Thomas opened the door for me, I stepped onto the pristine marble floor of the boutique. The interior smelled of expensive gardenias and polished leather. Racks of custom silk and chiffon garments lined the walls. Almost immediately, I heard a familiar shrill voice echoing from the VIP fitting area in the back of the store. It was Valerie. She was loudly berating a young sales associate about the quality of the complimentary champagne. I walked quietly toward the center of the showroom, browsing a rack of emerald green evening gowns. From the corner of my eye, I saw Harper step out of the dressing room. She was wearing a heavily beaded, outrageously expensive white gown, intended for her upcoming rehearsal dinner. Valerie clapped her hands in delight, praising Harper's elegance. Then Harper turned toward the main mirror and caught sight of me standing near the display. Harper's face immediately contorted with a mixture of confusion and deep annoyance. She marched out of the VIP section, the heavy silk of her dress dragging across the marble floor. Valerie followed closely behind, her eyes narrowing as she recognized me. "Are you completely lost, Jada?" Harper demanded, her voice carrying across the quiet boutique. She looked me up and down, taking in my understated but custom-tailored charcoal suit. "This is a private, high-end designer boutique. They do not sell discount business casual wear here. You cannot just wander in off the street because you want to take pictures for your little social media pages." Valerie let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Honestly, Jada, this is embarrassing. Did you follow us here to beg for money? I told you at the dinner table we are done supporting your pathetic lifestyle. The security guard at the door must have been looking the other way." Harper crossed her arms, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. "You really need to understand boundaries, Jada. Establishments like Elise are reserved for a certain caliber of clientele. People from your specific background, with your limited financial means, make the actual paying customers feel incredibly uncomfortable. The sales associates are not here to monitor window shoppers who cannot even afford the sales tax on these garments. You should stick to the outlet malls, where you blend in better." The blatant, classist, and racially coded microaggression hung heavily in the fragrant air. Several sales associates froze their eyes wide with shock. The boutique owner, a sophisticated Frenchwoman named Madame Elise, hurried out from the back office upon hearing the commotion. "Is there a problem out here?" Madame Elise asked, looking nervously between Harper and me. Harper turned to the owner with a haughty glare. "Yes, there is a massive problem. This woman is harassing us. She clearly does not belong in a store of this caliber. I am trying to purchase my rehearsal dinner gown, and her presence is completely ruining the aesthetic of my fitting. I want her removed immediately, before I decide to take my business elsewhere." Madame Elise finally looked directly at me. Her panicked expression instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of profound, reverent recognition. She bypassed Harper completely and rushed toward me, clasping her hands together. "Madam CEO," the owner said, bowing her head respectfully. "It is an absolute honor to have you in my boutique today. I was not informed you had scheduled a fitting. Please allow me to close the store to the public so you may browse in complete privacy." Harper's jaw dropped. Valerie stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a display pedestal. They stared at Madame Elise as if the woman had suddenly spoken in a foreign language. "That will not be necessary, Elise," I replied, maintaining a calm, authoritative tone. "I am actually here on official business for the Vanguard Equity Philanthropic Foundation. We are hosting our annual charity auction this Saturday to benefit underprivileged youth in Atlanta. I need to procure luxury items for the silent auction." "Of course," Madame Elise said eagerly. "How many gowns were you looking to purchase for the charity event?" I looked at Harper, letting a cold, victorious smile touch my lips. "All of them," I stated clearly. "I will purchase your entire seasonal inventory. Every dress, every accessory, every piece of jewelry currently on the floor. Box everything up and send the invoice directly to my chief financial officer." Madame Elise gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in pure delight. She was looking at a multi-million-dollar transaction secured in a matter of seconds. "Right away, Madam CEO. I will have the staff begin packing the inventory immediately." Harper's face turned a violent shade of crimson. "You cannot do that!" she shrieked, gesturing wildly to the white beaded gown she was currently wearing. "I have not paid for this dress yet. It is my rehearsal dinner outfit." "Then you better pay for it right now, Harper," I suggested smoothly, "before my purchase order clears the system." Harper frantically gestured to Valerie. "Give me your card. Pay for it quickly." Valerie, sweating profusely, dug into her purse. She pulled out a different gold credit card, one she mistakenly believed was safe from the previous country club freeze. She practically shoved it into the hands of a nearby sales associate. "Run it for the white dress. Hurry!" The associate rushed to the register, swiped the gold card, and waited. A loud, sharp beep echoed through the boutique. The associate frowned and tried again. Another harsh beep followed. "I am very sorry, ma'am," the associate called out, holding the card up. "It says the account has been seized by a federal creditor. The transaction is completely denied." Harper let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. "Try mine!" she yelled, running to her own purse and throwing a premium platinum card onto the counter. "My father pays this bill. It has to work." The associate swiped Harper's card. The machine beeped negatively once again. "Declined, miss. The system says this card is linked to a flagged financial account under investigation." I watched with immense satisfaction. My legal team had moved faster than expected. The shadow loan MJ took out had triggered massive fraud alerts across all associated accounts, including the ones temporarily tied to Harper. The net was tightening rapidly. Madame Elise stepped forward, her expression hardening as she looked at the two panicked women. "Ladies, your cards are declining, and this entire collection now belongs to Vanguard Equity. You are attempting to purchase merchandise you cannot afford while insulting my most prestigious client." Valerie tried to argue, her voice shaking with humiliation. "Elise, please. We are elite members of this community. You know my husband." "I know that your credit is completely worthless," Madame Elise replied sharply. She gestured toward the fitting rooms. "Take off the gown immediately. Leave my boutique right now, or I will have my security guards physically remove you both from these premises permanently." While Valerie and Harper were being escorted out of the boutique by security guards, Marcus Sr. was experiencing his own personal hell across town. The walls of his corporate office were rapidly closing in on him. His chief financial officer had just handed him a stack of default notices that effectively ended his long career. Every supplier had halted shipments. His payroll accounts were frozen solid. The banks were refusing his calls, and the shadow lender MJ had foolishly engaged was threatening immediate action against the family estate. Desperation makes arrogant men do highly predictable things. My father needed cash, and he needed it before the sun went down. Assuming I was still the obedient, struggling daughter, he could easily manipulate. Marcus Sr. drove his leased Mercedes straight to my old neighborhood. For the past 5 years, I had maintained a modest address at a mid-rise residential building in Midtown Atlanta. It was the address I provided for all family correspondence, specifically to keep them completely blind to my actual financial status. My father had only visited the property once, years ago, complaining about the lack of valet parking and the purely functional aesthetic. He expected to find me sitting in a cramped apartment, terrified of the world and desperate for his sudden paternal attention. He parked illegally in front of the glass entrance and stormed through the revolving doors. He did not notice the sleek new branding on the exterior walls, nor did he pay attention to the high-end security upgrades in the lobby. He marched directly to the concierge desk, slapping his hand against the polished granite counter. "I need you to buzz up to apartment 418, my father demanded, his voice echoing with aggressive entitlement. "Tell Jada her father is here, and I do not have time to wait in the lobby." The concierge, a sharp young man in a tailored uniform, looked at the angry man with complete professional detachment. "I am sorry, sir. Apartment 418 no longer exists as a standard unit. The entire 4th and 5th floors are currently undergoing a massive architectural combination. Furthermore, we do not allow unannounced visitors past the security checkpoint." "Do you know who I am?" my father shouted, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of red. "I am Marcus Sr. My daughter rents a unit in this miserable building. Call her down right now before I have your management company fire you." "My management company works directly for your daughter, Marcus," I said, stepping out of the private executive elevator. My father whipped around, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. I was wearing a pristine white blazer and holding a digital tablet containing the exact blueprints of the building. I walked slowly across the expansive lobby, my heels clicking rhythmically against the Italian marble. The concierge immediately stepped back, bowing his head in quiet respect as I approached. "What are you talking about?" my father asked, his arrogant facade slipping into utter confusion. "You rent a one-bedroom apartment here. I saw the lease agreement 5 years ago." "I rented a unit 5 years ago," I corrected smoothly, stopping just a few feet away from him. 4 years ago, Vanguard Equity purchased the entire building. 3 years ago, I bought the surrounding commercial block. I do not just live here, Dad. I own the concrete you are standing on. I own the parking spot where you illegally left your car. Now why are you screaming at my staff in the middle of the afternoon?" The reality of my wealth hit him like a physical blow. He looked around the lobby, finally noticing the subtle, expensive upgrades the Vanguard Equity logos etched into the frosted glass, and the elite security personnel standing quietly near the exits. His shoulders slumped slightly, but his desperate need for money quickly overrode his shock. He shifted his strategy, trying to invoke the patriarchal authority he had always used to control me. "Jada, we have a massive family emergency," my father said, lowering his voice in a frantic attempt to sound reasonable. "There has been a catastrophic error with the banks. Vanguard Equity, some ruthless corporate firm, has aggressively frozen our accounts. MJ and Harper are supposed to have their engagement party this weekend. The vendors are threatening to walk out. My company needs a temporary cash injection to make payroll by tomorrow morning. You clearly have resources I was unaware of. I need you to take out a personal loan against this building right now. I need $2 million to clear this up." I stared at him, genuinely marveling at his absolute lack of shame. "You came to my property after throwing me out of your house to demand I take out a loan to fund your stepson's wedding party? It is a temporary bridge loan," my father insisted, stepping closer. "I will pay you back with interest the moment my corporate accounts are unfrozen. You owe this family your loyalty, Jada. I put a roof over your head. I provided for you. This is what families do. We protect each other when outsiders try to destroy us." "Loyalty requires a two-way street, Dad," I replied, my voice turning to absolute ice. You did not show any loyalty when Valerie ordered me to pack my bags. You did not protect me when Harper insulted my career right in front of your face. You sat at the head of your dining table and told me I was a failure who was ruining your high society image. You told me I contributed nothing to your legacy. I was angry, he pleaded, his hands shaking slightly. You know how Valerie gets when she is stressed about social events. I had to keep the peace in my own household. You are my daughter, Jada. You have to help me fix this. I cannot fix it, I stated clearly, looking him dead in the eyes, ending the conversation. My father stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, wordlessly, as the absolute finality of my refusal sank into his mind. I watched the last traces of his patriarchal authority dissolve into the cold, polished floor of my lobby. Without waiting for security to escort him out, Marcus Sr. turned around and shuffled toward the revolving doors. His shoulders were slumped, his gait heavy and uneven. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on the tracks with a massive freight train bearing down on him. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I simply turned my back on his retreating figure and stepped back into the private executive elevator. The smooth ascent to the penthouse level gave me a moment to center my thoughts. The emotional ties were officially severed. Any lingering shadow of the obedient daughter had been thoroughly erased in that lobby. When the elevator doors parted, I walked directly into the primary conference room. David and Jonathan were already seated at the massive obsidian table. A stack of thick, leather-bound portfolios rested in the center, flanked by two glowing digital tablets. The long-awaited hour had finally arrived. He just left, I announced, taking my seat at the head of the table. He came begging for a $2 million personal loan to cover the extravagant engagement party and his corporate payroll. I sent him away with absolutely nothing. David adjusted his glasses, a look of grim satisfaction crossing his face. His timing is impeccably poor, Jada. While he was downstairs pleading for a bailout, the Federal Clearinghouse officially processed our final acquisition requests. Vanguard Equity has successfully absorbed the entirety of his corporate debt portfolio. Furthermore, we acquired the primary mortgage on the suburban family estate today. Jonathan slid the first heavy portfolio toward me. You are now legally their sole creditor. Every single dime Marcus Sr. owes, he owes directly to you. His business loans, the revolving lines of corporate credit, and the residential mortgage on the house Valerie kicked you out of. All of it belongs to Vanguard Equity. I opened the portfolio. The pages were filled with staggering numbers. My father had leveraged his manufacturing company to the absolute brink of ruin, borrowing against future earnings to maintain a desperate facade of generational wealth. He had treated his corporate accounts like a personal vault. He used commercial funds to pay for Valerie's country club memberships and MJ's designer wardrobe while his actual business bled out. It was a masterclass in financial incompetence. The level of negligence here is truly breathtaking, I noted, flipping through the pages of defaulted loans and missed payment warnings. They were living a millionaire lifestyle on credit cards and commercial bridge loans. It was entirely a house of cards. Jonathan nodded, sliding a sleek silver pen across the table. Here are the foreclosure and default notices. Because they have missed 3 consecutive payment cycles on the main residential mortgage loan and breached the covenants of the commercial loans, we possess the legal right to execute immediate seizures. You just need to sign the paperwork. I took the pen. The weight of the silver felt perfect in my hand. I signed my name with precise, deliberate strokes on the residential eviction notice. I moved to the next page and signed the corporate default declaration. I moved to the final page and signed the total asset seizure authorization. The ink gleamed wet on the stark white paper. Do we dispatch the couriers immediately? David asked, reaching for the freshly signed legal documents. No, I said, placing my hand flat over the stack of papers. We hold them back. MJ and Harper are hosting their lavish rehearsal dinner this Friday evening at the Grand Piedmont Hotel. They are expecting 300 of the wealthiest guests in Atlanta. They are expecting a high society coronation. If we serve these notices today, they will cancel the event and hide from the public fallout. They will play the victims behind closed doors. I do not want them hiding David. I want them completely exposed in front of the exact people they are trying to desperately impress. I looked between my two trusted advisors. I want these notices served directly to their table during the wedding toasts. I want every politician and socialite in that ballroom to see the eviction papers. Jonathan smiled a sharp, predatory expression. The legal filings are complete. We control the timeline. The moment you give the signal, we will initiate the electronic locks on his corporate headquarters. The bank will seize the business assets, and the foreclosure on the mansion will become a matter of public record. They will be locked out of their offices and home the exact same dark night. Make sure the timing aligns perfectly with the FBI investigation, I instructed. We gave the federal agents the wire fraud dossier. They are building their case on the forged trust fund documents. The financial ruin must hit them simultaneously with the criminal consequences. Derek, my private investigator, walked into the conference room and handed me a sealed manila envelope. The final piece of the puzzle, Jada. I secured the exact floor plan and the seating chart for the rehearsal dinner at the Grand Piedmont Hotel. Harper's family has rented the Imperial Ballroom. Security is tight, but we have full access. I opened the envelope and spread the seating chart across the table. I traced the diagram until I found the head table where MJ, Harper, Valerie, and my father would be sitting. They had placed themselves right in the center of the room, maximizing their visibility. It was the perfect stage for their ultimate downfall. We are going to crash the rehearsal dinner, I said, my voice turning to absolute ice. I will deliver the foreclosure notices myself. Prepare my schedule for Friday night. We are going to show the elite exactly who they are dealing with this specific weekend. Friday evening arrived with a heavy, unseasonable downpour, but the weather did nothing to dampen the extravagant display at the Grand Piedmont Hotel. The historic downtown building was a fortress of old money and Southern prestige, its grand columns illuminated by golden spotlights. Inside the Imperial Ballroom, MJ and Harper were hosting their rehearsal dinner, funded entirely by stolen money and a fraudulent bridge loan. I stepped out of my Maybach, the rain bouncing off Thomas's wide umbrella as he escorted me to the VIP entrance. I was not wearing my usual tailored business suit. Tonight called for a different kind of armor. I wore a breathtaking, floor-sweeping emerald silk gown. It was the centerpiece of Madame Elise's seasonal collection, the very collection I had purchased out from under Harper earlier that week. The heavy silk trailed elegantly behind me as I walked past the velvet ropes. The double doors to the Imperial Ballroom stood wide open, spilling warm light and the sound of a live string quartet into the corridor. I paused at the threshold, taking in the scene. Crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant glow over 50 round tables, draped in imported white linen. Waiters in pristine tuxedos glided effortlessly through the crowd, carrying trays of vintage champagne and caviar canapes. At the center of the room, on a raised dais, sat the head table. My father, Marcus Sr., was laughing loudly with Harper's father, the state senator. MJ sat looking incredibly smug, wearing a custom tuxedo that my trust fund had paid for. Harper sat beside him in a backup dress she had likely scrambled to find, her hand resting conspicuously on the table to display her massive stolen diamond ring. Valerie was actively holding court, gesturing wildly with her champagne flute as she entertained a group of wealthy political donors. She was completely in her element, playing the role of the ultimate high society matriarch. I stepped fully into the ballroom. The emerald silk of my gown caught the light, and heads immediately began to turn. Conversations near the entrance slowed to a halt as guests noticed the uninvited arrival. It took less than a minute for the silence to ripple toward the center of the room. Valerie was mid-sentence when her eyes locked onto me. Her jaw dropped, the champagne flute slipping slightly in her manicured hand. Harper noticed the shift in Valerie's expression and turned her head. When Harper saw the emerald dress, the exact centerpiece gown she had been admiring at the boutique before I bought the entire inventory, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. MJ stood up so fast, his chair nearly toppled over backward. My father grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Valerie did not hesitate. She slammed her glass onto the table and marched directly toward me, her high heels clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood dance floor. Harper trailed right behind her, flanked by two burly hotel security guards she had apparently flagged down. The string quartet stopped playing. 300 of Atlanta's elite watched in breathless silence. "What do you think you are doing here, Jada?" Valerie hissed, keeping her voice low but incredibly sharp. "You were explicitly not invited to this event. You are trespassing on a private, highly secure political gathering." "I am simply attending a family function, Valerie," I replied calmly, my voice carrying effortlessly in the quiet room. "I brought a few important documents that my father needs to see tonight." "You are a pathetic, jealous black sheep," Valerie shouted, losing her grip on her high society persona. "You came here to ruin the aesthetic of my son's perfect night because you are a bitter, lonely failure. We are not letting you destroy this family's reputation in front of the senator." Valerie turned wildly toward the two security guards. "Grab this woman by the arms and throw her out onto the street immediately. She is an intruder." Harper stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger at my emerald gown. "She stole that dress from me. She is a fraud. Get her out of my rehearsal dinner right now, or my father will have both of you fired." The guards hesitated, looking uncertain. Before they could make a move, a loud, commanding voice echoed from the main entrance behind me. "Nobody is going to touch her." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as the general manager of the Grand Piedmont Hotel strode purposefully into the ballroom. He was flanked by the hotel's director of security and 4 additional executive staff members. The general manager, a distinguished older gentleman named Arthur, looked absolutely furious, but his anger was not directed at me. He stopped squarely between the 2 uncertain security guards and Valerie. Arthur immediately turned to me, placing his right hand over his heart, and bowed his head in a gesture of profound, undeniable respect. "Madam CEO, I am so incredibly sorry," Arthur said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent, captivated ballroom. "We did not know you were arriving this evening. I apologize deeply for the unacceptable behavior of these guests. We will handle this situation immediately." Valerie stumbled backward, her face draining of all color. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. Harper gripped her own arms, staring at the general manager, as if he had just completely lost his mind. "What are you talking about?" Valerie demanded, her voice cracking into a shrill, frantic pitch. "Are you insane? She is nobody. She is my husband's failure of a daughter. You work for me tonight. I rented this imperial ballroom. I demand you throw her out right now." Arthur slowly turned to face Valerie, his expression hardening into pure, freezing professional disdain. "You did not rent anything, ma'am. You signed a vendor agreement using a fraudulent shadow loan that triggered massive financial alerts across our banking systems this afternoon. You currently stand inside the flagship property of Vanguard Hospitality." The silence following Arthur's declaration was heavy and absolute. Valerie stared at the general manager as if he had just slapped her across the face. Her mouth formed a silent protest, but her vocal cords refused to produce a single sound. Harper staggered backward, her eyes darting frantically between Arthur, her parents, and the chandeliers. My father, Marcus Sr., remained entirely frozen at the head table, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the tablecloth. He knew what the words Vanguard hospitality meant. He knew the walls were closing in. I stepped around the paralyzed trio, my emerald gown gliding across the floor. I walked with the deliberate pace of an apex predator, circling its prey. The sea of wealthy politicians and Atlanta socialites parted instinctively, creating a clear path for me to reach the center dais. I climbed the stairs to the main stage, bypassing my father, and walked directly to the crystal podium. I grasped the silver microphone. A sharp feedback whine pierced the room, making several guests flinch. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing evenly from the surround sound speakers. "My name is Jada. I am the daughter of Marcus Sr. I know the schedule indicated that my father and the state senator were supposed to deliver the opening toasts. However, given the circumstances, I felt it necessary to adjust the itinerary. A marriage built on high society prestige should be completely transparent. Transparency, after all, is the ultimate currency of the elite." I looked down at Harper, who was shaking visibly, and then at her parents, standing rigid near their table. The senator's face was a mask of calculating fury. Harper has spent the last several months bragging to everyone in Buckhead about the incredible generational wealth she is marrying into. I continued pacing slowly behind the podium. She has boasted about my brother's limitless resources, his corporate promotion, and the undeniable financial power of my father's empire. Tonight, I wanted to celebrate that exact narrative, in fact. I brought a very special presentation to honor the groom and his immensely successful family. I gave a definitive nod to the audiovisual booth. My corporate security team had already secured the control room 10 minutes before my arrival. The romantic, soft focus engagement photos that had been looping on the 3 massive projection screens behind the dais instantly vanished. The screens flickered to black for a fraction of a second. Then, a high-resolution financial dossier illuminated the entire ballroom in bright, unforgiving light. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the crowd of 300 guests. "Let us begin with the cornerstone of this magnificent family legacy," I announced, gesturing gracefully to the center screen. Displayed in massive, unavoidable text was the official Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing for my father's company. What you are currently looking at is the finalized binding insolvency declaration for Marcus Sr.'s corporation. The business is not expanding. The business has not turned a profit in over 3 years. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the corporate headquarters was officially seized by its primary creditor. The bank accounts have frozen, the payroll is completely empty, and the suppliers have halted all shipments. My father dropped his head into his hands, unable to look at the hundreds of peers who were witnessing his absolute professional destruction. "But surely a wealthy family has personal assets to fall back on." I noted my tone dripping with theatrical sarcasm. I snapped my fingers. The screens instantly shifted to display the residential foreclosure notices. Unfortunately, that is also a complete fabrication. The sprawling suburban estate my father and stepmother used to host their lavish country club friends is actively being foreclosed upon. They have missed 4 consecutive mortgage payments. The eviction notices were legally signed and notarized yesterday afternoon. By Monday morning, they will be legally homeless. Valerie let out a strangled, pathetic sob, covering her face with her designer clutch. The whispers among the elite guests escalated into a chaotic, buzzing roar. Politicians were already stepping away from their tables, physically distancing themselves from the epicenter of the scandal. "Now let us discuss the groom," I said, my voice cutting sharply through the rising noise. The screens shifted again, this time displaying a catastrophic pie chart of MJ's personal debt. Marcus Jr. likes to project the image of a successful self-made executive. He drives a new Porsche and orders imported caviar. The reality is that MJ has zero income, zero personal assets, and a credit score that would disqualify him from leasing a standard apartment. He currently carries over $200,000 in high-interest credit card debt. He funded his luxury bachelor lifestyle exclusively by draining his father's failing corporate accounts. Harper turned to MJ, her eyes wide with shock and sheer, unadulterated horror. "Is this true?" she shrieked, grabbing his tuxedo jacket. "Tell me she is lying, MJ. Tell me this is a fake presentation." MJ could not speak. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. "It gets much worse, Harper," I continued, leaning intimately into the microphone. Because when MJ realized his father's accounts were frozen, he still had to pay for this extravagant rehearsal dinner. He needed to impress your father, the senator. So my brother did what any desperate, fraudulent man would do. He applied for a predatory short-term shadow loan from an unregulated lender. I pointed to the final document on the screen. It was the fraudulent warranty deed. To secure the cash for the food you are all eating and the champagne you are all drinking tonight, MJ used the family mansion as collateral. The problem is, MJ does not own the mansion. He forged his father's signature to temporarily transfer the deed, and he lied to the shadow lender about the property's active foreclosure status. My brother committed a severe act of mortgage fraud to pay the caterer. Pandemonium instantly struck. The elegant veneer of the once magnificent imperial ballroom shattered. The wealthy guests erupted into a deafening chorus of gasps and angry whispers. Several panicked politicians immediately pulled out their expensive cell phones, frantically typing messages to their public relations managers. Harper's mother stumbled backward, clutching her chest, as if the oxygen had been vacuumed from the room. My father stared blankly at the polished hardwood floor beneath him. MJ looked ready to vomit. Valerie simply stood frozen, her eyes wide with a manic, terrified energy. I stood silently and let the chaotic noise build for exactly 15 agonizing seconds. I let them marinate in the absolute destruction of their meticulously crafted social standing. Then I leaned back into the silver microphone. "Please, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice slicing through the frantic noise. "I kindly ask that you direct your attention back to the screens. Do not leave your seats just yet. As spectacular as mortgage fraud and bankruptcy might be, we have not even reached the main event of the evening. The worst is still to come." The ballroom slowly quieted down. The morbid curiosity of the crowd forced them to stay glued to the unfolding disaster. I tapped the podium, signaling my security team in the booth. The screens behind the dais flashed, transitioning from the fraudulent residential property deed to a highly detailed, scanned legal document bearing the official seal of a major national bank. "What you are looking at now is a deeply personal piece of my family history," I explained, maintaining a chilling calm. "When my biological mother passed away, she left behind a sealed trust fund. It was an inheritance meant to ensure her only child would have a secure future. The legal stipulations were incredibly strict. The funds were completely locked, untouchable by anyone, including myself, until my 35th birthday. It was a sacred, legally binding promise from a dying mother." I paused, allowing the gravity of those words to settle over the silent audience. I turned my body slightly, locking eyes directly with Valerie and MJ. However, my stepmother and my half-brother decided that high society status was far more important than a sacred promise. I continued, pointing to the bottom of the projected document. "They approached a bank and took out a massive line of credit, secured against the principal balance of my sealed trust. To do this, they needed my explicit permission. Because I would never grant that permission, they simply created a fraudulent power of attorney. They explicitly forged my signature on everything." I walked to the edge of the dais, looking down directly at Harper's father, the prominent state senator. His face was a mask of calculating horror. He knew where this presentation was heading. "Senator," I said, addressing him clearly, "you have built your entire political career on a platform of law, order, and absolute integrity. You pride yourself on surrounding your family with prestige. I know your daughter Harper has spent the last few weeks showing off the magnificent 6-carat diamond ring currently sitting on her left hand. She loudly and proudly told everyone in this grand room that MJ designed it himself, sparing absolutely no expense to symbolize his immense wealth and devotion." Harper instinctively pulled her left hand back, hiding it behind her silk gown, as if the ring had suddenly caught fire. Her breathing turned rapid and shallow. "Let us look at the receipts," I declared. The 3 massive projection screens shifted simultaneously. They displayed the itemized routing numbers, the bank transfer logs, and the final invoice from an exclusive luxury jeweler in Manhattan. The purchase price of $250,000 was highlighted in bright, glowing red text. "MJ did not buy that ring with his hard-earned corporate salary," I stated, my voice echoing relentlessly through the speakers. "He bought that ring with the money he stole from my dead mother's trust fund." But MJ and Valerie did not just commit simple theft. They transferred those stolen funds across state lines from a bank in Georgia directly to a diamond merchant in New York, using digital financial networks. Senator, I know you are well versed in the United States Criminal Code. You know what that specific action constitutes. The senator closed his eyes, clenching his jaw so tightly I could see the muscles jumping in his cheek. He knew exactly what it meant. "For those in the room who are not familiar with federal law," I continued, looking back at the captivated audience, "forging a signature to secure a loan is bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. Transferring those illicitly gained funds across state lines is a direct violation of federal law. It is called wire fraud. It is not a minor misdemeanor. It is a severe federal offense, carrying a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary." "You see, Harper," I said, turning my gaze back to the terrified bride-to-be, "your perfect fiancé did not just buy you a diamond. He bought you a federal crime. You are currently wearing the proceeds of a massive, documented felony on your finger. Every caterer in this room, every florist who arranged these centerpieces, and every drop of champagne you have served tonight was paid for with stolen money. Your entire fairy tale wedding is a criminal enterprise." I looked back at the senator and his wife. Their political survival instincts were visibly kicking in. "I strongly suggest you evaluate your current associations, Senator," I advised calmly, "because earlier this morning, my legal team handed this entire, irrefutable digital dossier directly to the White-Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The federal agents have the IP logs, they have the wire transfer receipts, they have the forged signatures. This is no longer just a family dispute or a corporate bankruptcy issue. This is an active federal criminal investigation, and the authorities do not care about your country club memberships or your political campaign donors." I stepped back from the edge of the large stage, returning to the polished podium. The absolute destruction of their high society facade was now completely irreversible. I had stripped away every single lie they had told to elevate themselves. "I told you earlier this week that failures do not get to dictate the rules," I concluded, placing the microphone back into its silver stand. "You tried to build an empire on my back. You tried to use my mother's legacy to buy your way into the elite. But the cold truth always comes due." The silence that followed my final words was completely suffocating. No one in the grand imperial ballroom dared to take a single breath. I stepped away from the podium, leaving the glowing financial documents projected on the massive screens behind me. Down on the main floor, the reality of the impending federal indictment was crashing over the head table like a tidal wave. The state senator Harper's father was the first to break the paralysis. Political survival was his primary instinct, and right now, he was standing at ground zero of a massive federal fraud scandal. He turned toward his wife, giving her a sharp, decisive nod. The message was clear. They needed to sever all ties with my family immediately before the press caught wind of this disaster. The senator grabbed Harper by her bare shoulder, his grip visibly tight, and yanked her away from MJ. "We are leaving right now," the senator hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and absolute fury. "Do not say another word to these people, Harper. Do you understand me? You are not marrying into a family of federal criminals. My political career will not survive a wire fraud indictment." Harper stumbled backward, her beaded silk dress tangling around her ankles. She looked at her father, then at the glowing screens, displaying the forged bank transfers, and finally at MJ. The arrogant, untouchable smirk she had worn since the day I met her completely vanished. In its place was a look of profound, calculating revulsion. She was not looking at her loving fiancé anymore. She was looking at a massive liability. The illusion of the wealthy, sophisticated groom had been entirely shattered, leaving behind nothing but a desperate, broke thief. MJ reached out his hand, his eyes wide with desperate panic. "Harper, please, wait," MJ begged, his voice cracking pitifully. "I can explain everything. I only did this to give you the wedding you deserved. I did it for us. We can still fix this." Harper slapped his hand away with such violent force that the sound echoed across the silent ballroom. "Do not touch me!" Harper shrieked, her voice echoing with pure venom. "You lied to me. You told me your family was elite. You told me you are a successful executive with unlimited resources. You are nothing but a broke, pathetic con artist. You let me walk around Buckhead showing off a stolen diamond ring." Valerie tried to intervene, stepping forward with her hands raised in a placating gesture. "Harper, darling, please, calm down," Valerie pleaded, tears streaking through her heavy makeup. "We are still a good family. We just hit a temporary financial rough patch. MJ loves you." Harper turned her vicious glare onto my stepmother. "Do not call me darling, you delusional fraud!" Harper spat her tone, laced with absolute disgust. "You are all nothing but common thugs, pretending to be high society. You tricked my family into associating with criminals. My parents are respected political figures, and you dragged us into a federal investigation to fund your fake, pathetic lifestyle." MJ fell to his knees on the polished hardwood floor, openly sobbing in front of 300 elite guests. "Harper, I love you," MJ cried out, grabbing the hem of her expensive gown. "Please do not walk out on me. I gave you everything." Harper looked down at him with a gaze so cold it could have frozen the entire room. "You gave me stolen property," Harper stated ruthlessly. She grabbed her left hand and violently yanked the massive 6-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger. She did not hand it back to him gently. With a vicious overhand throw, Harper hurled the heavy diamond ring directly at MJ's chest. The sharp metal struck him hard before clattering noisily onto the floor, rolling away until it hit the edge of the stage. "Keep your stolen jewelry," Harper commanded, turning her back on him completely. She linked arms with her furious parents. Without looking back a single time, the three of them marched briskly out of the imperial ballroom. The heavy double doors slammed shut behind them, sealing the definitive end of the wedding, the relationship, and my brother's future. The departure of the senator and his family acted as a sudden, undeniable catalyst for the rest of the high society attendees. The paralysis that had gripped the room finally broke, replaced by a wave of frantic, uncoordinated movement. Chairs scraped harshly against the wooden dance floor as wealthy guests rushed to gather their belongings. Nobody wanted to be photographed attending a rehearsal dinner funded by wire fraud. The mass exodus began immediately, with prominent businessmen and socialites practically sprinting toward the exits to avoid any association with my disgraced relatives. I stood silently on the elevated stage watching the magnificent collapse of their carefully constructed illusion. My father had not moved an inch since the senator dragged Harper away. Marcus Sr. stared blankly at the empty space where his future political connections had just been standing. The profound humiliation etched into his aging face was a stark contrast to the arrogant man who had proudly kicked me out of my childhood home. Valerie dropped to her knees beside her weeping son, desperately trying to comfort him, while simultaneously watching her elite friends flee the ballroom in absolute terror. The beautiful floral centerpieces and the towering crystal champagne pyramids now looked like tragic monuments to their greed. They had sacrificed my mother's legacy to buy a fleeting moment of prestige, and now they were left with nothing but public ruin. The ultimate reckoning was finally unfolding before my watchful eyes. I took a long, deep, steadying breath, absorbing the chaotic symphony of their total destruction. The string quartet had since packed up their instruments, fleeing quickly through the service doors to escape the madness. Every single calculating decision my cruel family had made over the past decade had finally culminated in this exact, perfectly inescapable nightmare. The heavy oak doors of the Imperial Ballroom were pushed apart with a sudden, overwhelming force that commanded the attention of every remaining person in the room. I stood at the edge of the elevated stage, watching as the final phase of my orchestrated dismantling took its physical form. A dozen individuals marched through the grand entrance, creating an immediate, terrifying contrast to the crystal chandeliers and scattered white roses. They wore dark, utilitarian windbreakers with bright yellow letters printed boldly across their backs. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived precisely on schedule. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern face and no tolerance for high society theatrics, strode directly down the center aisle. His team fanned out immediately, moving with military precision to secure all exits. The few remaining guests, mostly hotel staff and a handful of paralyzed socialites, too stunned to flee earlier, pressed their backs against the silk-draped walls. The clinking of abandoned champagne glasses and the soft murmurs of panic died instantly. The air in the ballroom grew thick-heavy with the undeniable reality of federal law enforcement stepping into a world that believed itself to be completely above the law. My father, Marcus Sr., took a hesitant step forward. He raised his hands in a placating gesture, instinctively trying to salvage whatever microscopic shred of authority he thought he still possessed. "Officers, there has been a massive misunderstanding here tonight," my father said, his voice shaking as he attempted to block the lead agent from reaching the dais. "I am Marcus Sr. I own a major corporation in this city. Whatever minor banking discrepancies you are investigating, my corporate attorneys will handle it first thing on Monday morning." The lead federal agent did not even slow his pace. He bypassed my father completely, treating the bankrupt patriarch like an irrelevant piece of furniture. The agent stepped up to the dais, his sharp gaze locking directly onto the two people cowering near the abandoned head table. "Valerie and Marcus Jr., the lead agent announced, his voice booming with absolute, unforgiving authority. "We are executing federal arrest warrants issued by the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. You are both being taken into federal custody immediately." Valerie let out a blood-curdling shriek. She scrambled backward, her expensive designer heels slipping on the polished hardwood floor until her back hit the edge of the stage. "No!" Valerie screamed, frantically waving her hands. "You cannot arrest me! I am a prominent member of this community. I host charity galas. That woman on the stage is lying to you. Jada is a bitter, jealous sociopath who faked all of those documents to ruin my son." The agent did not entertain her hysterical delusions. He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. Valerie, you are being formally charged with multiple counts of aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, and federal wire fraud. We have secured undeniable digital evidence of forged trust fund documents and illegal interstate wire transfers exceeding $200,000. Turn around and place your hands behind your back immediately. MJ remained on his knees, completely paralyzed by sheer terror. He looked down at the discarded 6-carat diamond engagement ring resting near his shoes, and then up at the federal agents moving toward him with heavy metal handcuffs. His arrogant golden child persona evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, weeping fraud. "Dad, do something!" MJ cried out, his voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. He reached a trembling hand toward Marcus Sr. "Call your lawyers. Call the senator. You know people in the Justice Department. Tell them I did not know what I was doing. Tell them it was all Mom's idea. She is the one who wanted the expensive wedding." Valerie whipped her head around, staring at her beloved son in absolute betrayal. Even in the face of federal prison, they were already turning on each other like starving wolves. "You ungrateful little coward!" Valerie shrieked at MJ. "You are the one who needed the ring. You are the one who needed to impress that spoiled white girl." "Quiet," the second agent commanded, stepping behind MJ and forcibly pulling his arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the ballroom. MJ let out a loud, miserable wail as the cold steel locked around his wrists. 2 other agents approached Valerie. She tried to fight them off, flailing her arms and sobbing wildly about her expensive gown being ruined. The agents easily overpowered her, turning her around and securing her wrists. The visual contrast was absolutely staggering. Just an hour ago, they were the glittering royalty of Atlanta, sipping imported champagne and mocking my existence. Now they stood in their ruined designer formal wear, chained together like common criminals, publicly humiliated in the venue they had rented to display their supreme dominance. The lead agent began reading them their Miranda rights in a steady, monotonous drone. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Marcus Sr. stood completely frozen, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. He watched in helpless horror as his beautiful, high society wife and his precious, perfect golden boy were dragged away in handcuffs. The empire he thought he had built was nothing but dust. The legacy he had bragged about at the dinner table was now officially a crime scene. I stood on the elevated stage looking down at my father. He slowly raised his head, his eyes meeting mine. There was no anger left in his gaze, only profound, crushing despair. He finally understood the true cost of his arrogance. I did not offer him a single ounce of pity. I simply turned my back, letting the armed federal agents march my stepmother and my half-brother out of the grand ballroom, their pathetic sobs fading into the cold, rainy night. A week after the disastrous rehearsal dinner, the sprawling suburban mansion felt like an abandoned tomb. Marcus Sr. sat entirely alone in his dark, silent home office, surrounded by the rotting remnants of his shattered legacy. The heavy mahogany desk, once a powerful symbol of his patriarchal authority, was now buried under a mountain of past due bills and federal legal notices. Valerie and MJ were still sitting in a federal holding facility. The judge had set their bail at an astronomical amount, explicitly citing them as significant flight risks, given their proven history of wire fraud and identity theft. Marcus Sr. had spent the last 7 days frantically calling every single politician, business associate, and country club friend he had ever known. He begged for character references. He pleaded for temporary cash loans to secure their bail. The response was a unified, deafening wall of silence. Men who used to drink his expensive scotch and smoke his imported cigars now sent his calls directly to voicemail. The state senator had publicly denounced the family on local television, completely severing all ties. Marcus Sr. was entirely isolated, drowning in the terrible consequences of his own boundless arrogance. The heavy brass knocker on the front door suddenly echoed through the empty house, startling him. Marcus Sr. hurried toward the foyer, a pathetic spark of hope igniting in his chest. He desperately believed one of his elite friends had finally arrived to offer a massive financial bailout. He swung the heavy front door open, an eager, pathetic smile forming on his face. He did not find a wealthy savior standing on his porch. He found 2 armed county sheriffs and a stern-looking process server. The server handed him a thick, sealed manila envelope. Marcus Sr. tore it open with trembling hands. It was an official, finalized notice of foreclosure and immediate eviction. Vanguard Equity had officially executed the default clause on the residential mortgage. His grace period had completely expired. The property was scheduled for a public auction on the county courthouse steps that very morning. Marcus Sr. stared at the legal document, the cold reality finally crushing his chest. The grand colonial estate, the ultimate symbol of his high society status, was being ripped away. He had exactly 2 hours to gather whatever belongings he could carry before the sheriffs returned to permanently lock the doors. Desperation drove Marcus Sr. directly to the county courthouse. He stood at the bottom of the concrete steps, clutching his worn leather briefcase, his expensive suit wrinkled and smelling of stale sweat. A small crowd of real estate investors and curious onlookers had gathered for the morning auctions. Marcus Sr. frantically scanned the crowd until he spotted Arthur Pendleton, an old golfing buddy and wealthy property developer. Marcus Sr. rushed over, grabbing Arthur tightly by the arm. He begged Arthur to place a proxy bid on the mansion, promising to work for free, offering to clean swimming pools, pleading for an arrangement where he could just rent a single room in his former home. Arthur physically pulled his arm away, looking at Marcus Sr. with absolute disgust. Arthur explicitly told him that nobody in Atlanta would ever do business with a family of federal criminals. Marcus Sr. was left standing completely alone as the county auctioneer stepped up to the wooden podium and announced the sale of the Buckhead estate. The auctioneer read the property description and opened the floor for starting bids. The starting price was set incredibly low, reflecting the distressed nature of the debt Vanguard Equity had forced into foreclosure. Before Arthur or any other local investor could raise a paddle, a tall, sharply dressed man stepped forward from the back of the crowd. It was David, my chief financial officer, wearing a flawless, tailored suit and carrying a slim leather briefcase. David raised his bidding paddle high into the crisp morning air. He did not shout out a random number. David projected his voice clearly across the quiet courthouse steps, stating an incredibly specific, undeniably deliberate dollar amount. He bid exactly $1,250,000. It was not a random valuation. It was the exact, to-the-penny total amount of money Valerie and MJ had illegally drained from my biological mother's sealed trust fund. The other investors in the crowd lowered their paddles immediately. They recognized David. They recognized the immense corporate power of Vanguard Equity, and they understood a hostile takeover when they saw one. Nobody dared to challenge the bid. The auctioneer called out once, twice, and struck his wooden gavel against the podium. The sale was officially finalized. Marcus Sr. stumbled forward, his breathing ragged. He stared at David, his mind struggling to comprehend the surgical precision of the strike. David calmly walked over to the defeated patriarch and handed him a glossy business card. Marcus Sr. looked down at the Vanguard Equity logo. He looked up at David, tears of sheer humiliation welling in his tired eyes. He finally realized the absolute poetry of his punishment. The daughter he had carelessly thrown out of her childhood bedroom now legally owned the entire estate. I had just purchased his grand, magnificent kingdom for pennies on the dollar using the exact monetary figure his wife and son had stolen from me. His complete ruin was now signed, sealed, and publicly delivered. David adjusted his impeccable suit jacket and gave my father a brief dismissive nod. He did not offer a single word of sympathy or comfort. He simply turned around and walked away, disappearing smoothly back into the bustling crowd of investors. My father remained rooted to the concrete steps of the courthouse, clutching the useless business card in his trembling hand. He had prioritized a facade of elite social standing over his own flesh and blood. He had chosen to defend thieves. Now he was entirely homeless, standing alone in the humid morning air, with absolutely nothing left to his ruined name. 3 days passed since the courthouse auction. The humid morning air gave way to a brutal Atlanta thunderstorm. The torrential downpour turned the steep roads of Buckhead into rushing rivers. Marcus Sr. had managed to pawn his final possession, a vintage Rolex watch he had hidden in his briefcase, for just enough cash to secure a high-risk bail bond for his wife and son. Valerie and MJ were released from federal custody, but their temporary freedom offered no comfort. They emerged from the bleak holding facility wearing the exact same wrinkled, utterly ruined formal wear they had been publicly arrested in. They had no access to their bank accounts, no vehicles to drive, and not a single friend willing to answer their desperate phone calls. They were utterly destitute. With their suburban mansion legally seized by Vanguard Equity, they had nowhere to go. Desperation stripped away the last remaining shreds of their pride. In the pouring rain, the three of them were forced to take a city bus as far as it would go, then walk. They trudged up the long, private road leading to the summit of the Buckhead Hills. Valerie dragged a flimsy plastic shopping bag containing the few personal items the federal agents allowed her to keep. Her expensive gown was soaked through, clinging to her shivering frame, splashed with mud from the passing traffic. MJ walked beside her, his custom tuxedo ruined, his head hung low in absolute defeat. He was terrified, facing decades in a federal penitentiary once the trial began. Marcus Sr. led the miserable procession, his posture completely broken, the rain washing over his deeply lined face. They reached the towering iron security gates of my private estate just after 9 o'clock at night. The heavy rain pounded against the paved circular driveway, creating a loud symphony of absolute misery. Marcus Sr. stumbled toward the glowing security intercom panel mounted on the stone pillar. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely press the button. He pushed it once, twice, and then leaned his wet forehead against the cold stone, gasping for breath. Inside the warmth of my master suite, I sat comfortably in a plush velvet armchair. A fire crackled cheerfully in the marble fireplace, casting a soft glow across the room. I held a crystal flute of vintage champagne, watching the high-definition security monitors mounted on my wall. The night vision cameras captured their pathetic arrival perfectly. They looked like drowned rats, shivering and crying in the dark. I took a slow sip of my champagne, letting them wait in the freezing rain for 3 full minutes. I wanted them to feel the stinging bite of the weather before I reached out and pressed the intercom button on my desk. "You are trespassing," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the waterproof speakers at the gate. "State your business, or I will have security escort you off the premises." Marcus Sr. jerked his head up, desperate, as he stared at the camera lens. "Jada, please!" my father cried out, his voice cracking over the intercom. "It is your father!" "We have absolutely nowhere else to go. The banks took everything. The government froze our last hidden accounts. We do not have a single dollar for a motel room, and the homeless shelters downtown are full. You have to let us inside. You are our only hope." Valerie pushed her way to the intercom, sweeping wet hair out of her ruined face. The arrogant matriarch who had constantly mocked my existence was now openly sobbing, begging like a desperate child. "Jada, I am so sorry," Valerie wailed, tears streaming down her face. "I was wrong about you. You are a brilliant, successful woman. Please just open the gates. We are freezing out here. I will gladly sleep on the hard floor. I will scrub the bathrooms. Just please do not leave us out in this storm." MJ dropped to his knees right in the middle of the dark, flooded driveway. The muddy water soaked through his ripped tuxedo pants. He clasped his hands together in a pathetic gesture of prayer. "Jada, please help me," MJ sobbed hysterically, looking at the security camera. "The lawyer said I am going to federal prison for 20 years. The bail bondsman is going to revoke my bond if I do not have a permanent address by tomorrow morning." "You have the best legal team in the state. You have millions of dollars. You can afford to fix this. Please, you are my sister. You have to save me from going to jail." I stared at the glowing monitors, observing their complete humiliation. They were invoking the concept of family loyalty, a concept they had weaponized and abused for decades. They expected me to simply erase their horrific crimes because we shared blood. They wanted a magical bailout from the very woman they had viciously discarded. "You ruthlessly threw me out of my childhood home in the middle of the freezing night," I reminded them, my voice smooth and perfectly detached. "You stole my mother's legacy to buy a ring for a woman who despised you. You committed federal fraud to maintain an illusion of supremacy. Now that your illusion has shattered, you want to crawl back and demand my protection." "We are your family!" Marcus Sr. yelled, pounding his fist against the stone pillar in absolute desperation. "You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. We are begging for forgiveness. You have to show mercy, Jada. God expects you to show mercy to your parents. Mercy is reserved for those who show remorse before they get caught," I replied coldly. "You are not sorry for what you did to me. You are only sorry that you lost your stolen money and your fake country club status." I leaned closer to the microphone, delivering my absolute final verdict. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the exact consequences. The intercom crackled and went dead. Down in the flooded driveway, the three shivering figures stared up at the glowing windows of my master's suite. I stepped away from the glowing security console and walked slowly toward the expansive glass doors leading directly to my private balcony. I slid the heavy glass open and stepped out into the freezing, relentless downpour. The violent rain instantly soaked through my expensive silk robe, but I did not care about the cold. I wanted to look them directly in the eyes, without the digital barrier of a security camera lens. I stood tall at the edge of the thick glass railing, looking down at the spectacular ruin of the exact people who had spent decades trying to maliciously destroy my spirit. Marcus Sr. spotted my silhouette immediately. He staggered forward heavily, desperately clutching the thick iron bars of the towering security gate. His face was extremely pale, lined with deep exhaustion and absolute crushing despair. "Jada, please!" my father yelled, his raspy voice barely audible over the roaring, violent thunder. "I am your father. You cannot leave us out here in the storm. We have no money. We have absolutely nowhere to sleep tonight. Please, just give us one room for the night, just a safe place to rest until we can figure out a new plan." Valerie desperately pressed her wet, ruined face against the cold black iron bars. "I am so sorry for everything I ever said to you. I was foolish and terribly cruel. You are the rightful owner of this beautiful estate. Just open the gates, Jada. Have a little mercy on us." MJ was openly sobbing now, his body shivering uncontrollably in the freezing mud. "I will do anything you ask. I will work for you every single day. Please, do not let me go back to federal prison." I rested my calm hands firmly on the freezing glass balcony railing. I looked down at the pathetic, arrogant matriarch who had actively made my entire childhood a living daily nightmare. I looked at the spoiled golden child who had selfishly stolen my biological mother's sacred legacy to fund a completely fraudulent high society fantasy. Finally, I looked at the broken man who had continuously prioritized elite social status over his own flesh and blood. I felt absolutely no pity for any of them. "It is quite incredibly ironic, Valerie," I shouted down to them, my strong voice cutting sharply through the heavy, pounding rain. "Do you clearly remember the cruel words you spoke to me at the dining room table just a few short weeks ago? Do you remember the exact, vindictive phrasing you deliberately used when you aggressively demanded I hand over the only physical space that held my late mother's memory?" Valerie froze completely, her wide eyes filling with stark, sudden terror as the terrible realization finally struck her. "You told me that I did not need a master suite," I continued relentlessly, making sure they heard every single syllable. "You told me that failures do not get to dictate family rules under your own roof." I paused deliberately, letting the cold, harsh reality of my next words settle heavily over their freezing, shivering bodies. "My house has 8 bedrooms. It has a massive heated indoor pool, a private luxury theater, and 3 separate beautifully furnished guest wings. But unfortunately, either you pack your wet bags and get off my property right now, or I call the local police. Failures do not get to dictate the rules." Marcus Sr. immediately dropped to his knees in the muddy water. He reached his desperate, shaking hands through the thick black iron bars, loudly pleading for a second chance that would definitively never come. "Jada, you are my own blood," my father cried out, hot tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "You are my only remaining legacy." I stared down at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated ice. "Your legacy is standing right next to you, in a completely ruined, muddy tuxedo," I replied coldly. "Your legacy is a massive federal wire fraud indictment hanging over your head. Your legacy is an empty corporate bank account and a massive public scandal. You built your entire business empire on weak lies, and you helplessly watched it burn straight to the cold ground. Do not dare try to claim me as your successful legacy, now that I am the only one left standing." I slowly turned my head and looked directly toward the brick security gatehouse, located just inside the estate property line. My head of security, a towering, heavily armed man named Jackson, was standing by the illuminated control panel, quietly awaiting my final executive order. I gave Jackson a single, highly definitive nod. Jackson immediately hit the main electrical breaker switch. The heavy steel deadbolts on the towering estate gates engaged with a loud, resounding metallic clank that sharply echoed over the booming thunderstorm. The bright exterior floodlights surrounding the grand entrance suddenly snapped completely off, instantly plunging my father, my stepmother, and my half-brother into complete and total darkness. They violently screamed my name, loudly into the black void. They begged the empty, rainy night for an impossible salvation. I simply turned around and walked back inside my warm, brightly lit, deeply luxurious sanctuary. I slid the heavy glass balcony door firmly shut, instantly and completely cutting off the pathetic sound of their miserable, endless wailing. I firmly locked the sliding door and pulled the thick, heavy velvet curtains entirely closed. I walked gracefully over to my walnut desk and picked up my crystal flute of sparkling champagne. I took a very long, incredibly satisfying sip. The expensive vintage champagne tasted exactly like absolute, undeniable, permanent victory. They were finally gone forever, and I was completely free to build the perfect life I truly deserved without them weighing me down. The dark, stormy night outside raged on, but inside, I had absolute peace. The news of the federal raid at the Grand Piedmont Hotel dominated the morning headlines. 6 months later, I sat in the front row of the United States District Court, wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit. I watched with quiet, absolute satisfaction as the heavy gavel of federal justice finally fell. Valerie and Marcus Jr. stood before the federal judge, stripped of their designer clothes and wearing standard-issue bright orange prison jumpsuits. Their trial had been incredibly brief. The digital evidence compiled by my forensic accountants and the federal investigators was entirely irrefutable. The judge did not show them a single ounce of leniency. He explicitly condemned their actions, highlighting the malicious greed required to steal a deceased mother and her legacy to fund a fraudulent, superficial lifestyle. Valerie was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary for aggravated identity theft and bank fraud. Marcus Jr. received a 12-year sentence for orchestrating the wire fraud and attempting to leverage a foreclosed property. As the federal marshals placed them in handcuffs to transport them to prison, Valerie looked back at me from across the courtroom. Her eyes were hollow, completely devoid of the arrogant spark that had fueled her cruelty for decades. I did not offer her a parting glance. I simply turned my head, closing that dark chapter of my life forever. The collateral damage extending beyond the courtroom walls was equally profound. Harper and her prominent political family suffered a catastrophic public relations nightmare. The state senator and his association with a convicted federal fraudster destroyed his upcoming re-election campaign. Major donors pulled their funding immediately, citing severe concerns about his judgment and integrity. Harper quickly became a social pariah in Buckhead. She lost her prestigious job at a local boutique public relations firm and was forced to move out of state to escape the relentless, vicious local gossip. Her desperate attempt to play the innocent victim failed completely when journalists uncovered text messages showing she knew MJ was spending well beyond his apparent means. She had chosen to ignore the warning signs because the illusion of wealth was more important to her than the truth. My father, Marcus Sr., faced a punishment far worse than a prison cell. He was forced to witness the total, irreversible annihilation of the patriarchal empire he had brutally sacrificed his own daughter to build. Following the corporate bankruptcy and the foreclosure of his grand suburban estate, he was left entirely destitute. His so-called loyal friends in the business world completely blacklisted him. Today, the former chief executive officer resides in a dingy, extremely cheap motel located on the dilapidated outskirts of the city. He pays his weekly rent by working a minimum wage job as a night shift cashier at a local convenience store. He spends his long, exhausting nights standing behind a plastic register scanning items for truck drivers and late-night commuters. He has absolutely no remaining power, no social status, and no family left to control. He lost everything because he refused to appreciate the one person who had actually earned her success through genuine, honest, hard work. Meanwhile, I remained perfectly secure inside the high stone walls of my Buckhead estate. The massive financial empire I built through Vanguard Equity continued to expand, generating generational wealth that nobody could ever steal or manipulate. However, true justice required more than just acquiring wealth or watching my abusers face their rightful consequences. True justice required actively transforming the deep pain of my past into a powerful vehicle for positive, lasting change. I sat at the custom walnut desk in my home office, bathed in the warm, golden light of the late afternoon sun. My trusted estate manager, Elena, walked quietly into the room and placed a thick, leather-bound legal folder gently on my desk. "The final municipal zoning permits have cleared the City Council, Madam CEO," Elena announced, a proud smile touching her lips. "The contractors are ready to begin the renovation immediately." "Thank you, Elena," I replied, opening the thick folder. Inside, lay the finalized architectural blueprints for the sprawling suburban mansion that Vanguard Equity had seized from Marcus Sr. I was not going to sell the property to another wealthy, arrogant family. I was not going to let it stand as a monument to Valerie and her shallow greed. Instead, I picked up my favorite silver pen and signed the commercial rezoning documents with deliberate, joyful strokes. I officially transferred the ownership of the massive estate to my newly established philanthropic organization. The cold, toxic house where I was repeatedly told I was a failure was being completely gutted. We were tearing down the walls and expanding the living spaces to create a state-of-the-art transitional shelter and comprehensive educational foundation. It was specifically designed to provide secure housing, financial literacy training, and direct career mentorship for underprivileged Black women in the greater Atlanta area. I named the foundation after my late biological mother, ensuring her true legacy would be one of empowerment, education, and unyielding strength. I closed the leather folder and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my office. The panoramic view of the sprawling city stretched out endlessly before me. The setting sun painted the skyscrapers in brilliant shades of amber and rose. The fresh evening breeze drifted gently through the open balcony doors, carrying away the absolute last remaining fragments of my extremely painful past into the dark, quiet night sky. For 33 years, I had allowed other people to dictate my worth. I had allowed toxic family members to convince me that I was a secondary character in my own life. I had finally shattered that illusion completely. I looked out over the empire I had built with my own two hands, feeling the deep, unbreakable roots of my success anchoring me to the earth. I was completely free, infinitely powerful, and in absolute total control of my beautiful destiny.